In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a priceless 16th century manuscript, the Luminous Codex, vanishes from a locked bookshop case, leaving no trace but a wax smudge and a scuff mark. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet cunning, untangles a web of secrets among 4 suspects: a desperate shopkeeper, a nervous spinster, an obsessed scholar, and a wealthy collector. As village gossip swirls and clues emerge, dust trails, hidden sketches, a mysterious safe, Miss Marple sets a daring trap to catch the thief. In just one night, she unveils the truth, proving that in a village of secrets, no crime stays hidden from her relentless gaze. Chapter 1. The quiet shop on High Street, the village of St. Mary Mead, with its neat hedgerows and rose-draped cottages, lay bathed in the amber light of an autumn morning. The air carried a crisp bite, and leaves skittered along the cobbled High Street, where the daily rhythm of village life unfolded with predictable charm. At the heart of this gentle bustle stood Parchment and Quill, a rare bookshop whose mullioned windows gleamed like the spectacles of its owner, Mr. Reginald Hawthorne. The shop was a haven for bibliophiles, its shelves groaning under the weight of ancient volumes, their leather bindings embossed with faded gold, their pages whispering secrets of centuries past. It was here, on this unremarkable Tuesday, that Miss Jane Marple, with her soft white shawl and basket of knitting, stepped through the tinkling door, her mild blue eyes alert to the world's subtle discords. Miss Marple was no stranger to Parchment and Quill. Her visits were a quiet ritual, born of a love for old books and a sharper interest in the human stories they concealed. She had a way of noticing things, small things like the tremor in a voice or the flicker of a glance that others overlooked. Today, as she crossed the threshold, the familiar scent of aged paper and polished oak greeted her, but so too did an air of disquiet. Mr. Hawthorne, usually a picture of fastidious calm, stood behind the counter, his thin hands wringing a cloth as if it were his own nerves. His pince-nez perched precariously on his nose, and his grey hair, normally sleek, was slightly askew. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as the chime of the shop's bell. "I thought I might look at that lovely edition of Don's poems today." Mr. Hawthorne's eyes darted to her, then away, settling on the glass display case at the shop's centre. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice tight, "I'm afraid something dreadful has happened. The Luminous Codex, it's gone, stolen, I'm certain, from the case last night." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted, though her expression remained serene. She set her basket on a nearby table, her fingers brushing the wool of her knitting as if to anchor her thoughts. "Stolen? Dear me, that is serious. The Codex. Such a treasure. Tell me, when did you discover this?" Mr. Hawthorne gestured toward the case, his movements jerky. "This morning, when I opened the shop. I checked the case last night before locking up, and it was there, safe as always. But now—" He trailed off, pointing to the empty velvet cushion within the glass, where the Codex, a 16th century manuscript famed for its alchemical engravings and radiant illuminations, had once rested. The case itself was pristine, its brass lock unmarred, the glass unscratched. It was as if the book had simply dissolved into the ether. Miss Marple approached the case, her steps measured, her eyes scanning every detail. The shop was a cosy warren, its high shelves casting long shadows in the morning light. A single bulb hung overhead, its glow soft but sufficient. The floorboards, polished to a dark sheen, creaked faintly underfoot, and a small rug lay before the counter, its edges frayed from years of custom. Near the case, she noted a faint scuff mark, barely visible, as if someone had pivoted sharply on a heel. She filed this away, her mind already turning like the pages of a well-read novel. "How extraordinary," she murmured, peering at the lock. "And the key? You keep it behind the counter, do you not?" "Yes, on a hook," Mr. Hawthorne said, pointing to a brass hook nailed to the wall, where a single key dangled. "Only I have access to it, or so I thought. I can't imagine how anyone got in. The shop was locked, the windows secure. It's a mystery, Miss Marple, and a ruinous one. That book was worth £20,000. My reputation, my livelihood." His voice cracked, and he dabbed his brow with the cloth. Miss Marple's gaze softened, though her mind was anything but idle. She knew Mr. Hawthorne's pride in his collection, his almost reverent care for each volume. Yet she also knew that pride could mask desperation, and desperation could lead to curious deeds. "Who was in the shop yesterday?" she asked, her tone as casual as if she were inquiring about the weather. Mr. Hawthorne hesitated, then listed 4 names, himself, of course, Miss Clara Wentworth, a local spinster who'd lingered longer than usual, Dr. Ernest Quill, a scholar with a passion for medieval texts, and Mr. Victor Langston, a collector whose wealth was matched only by his ambition. Each, Miss Marple noted, had been near the codex at some point. Each might have seen the key, or known its hiding place. As she left the shop, promising to return, Miss Marple glanced back at the display case, its emptiness a silent challenge. The village of St. Mary Mead might seem a sleepy place, but she knew better. Beneath its tranquil surface, motives stirred. Greed, envy, obsession, and she intended to unravel them. With a small, determined smile, she adjusted her shawl and stepped into the autumn light, ready to observe the human heart in all its tangled complexity. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The autumn sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the cobbled high street, as Miss Jane Marple made her way back to Parchment and Quill. The rare bookshop, with its weathered sign and mullioned windows, stood like a sentinel of forgotten knowledge, its quiet facade belying the turmoil within. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as the pins in her knitting bag, was already sifting through the fragments of Mr. Hawthorne's account. The disappearance of the Luminous Codex, a 16th-century alchemical manuscript, was no ordinary theft. Its value, £20,000, a fortune in a village where a good coat cost a guinea, suggested a motive rooted in greed, obsession, or perhaps something darker. As she pushed open the shop's door, the bell's chime seemed to echo with the weight of unanswered questions. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old leather and dust, a fragrance Miss Marple found as comforting as her own hearth. The shop was a labyrinth of oak shelves, each groaning under the weight of ancient tomes, their spines embossed with titles in Latin, French, and faded English. Narrow aisles wound between them, leading to shadowed corners where light barely reached. At the room's heart stood the display case, a sturdy oak and glass structure that had housed the codex until its mysterious vanishing. Its glass panels gleamed under the soft glow of a single electric bulb, suspended from the ceiling like a solitary star. The floorboards, polished to a dark sheen, creaked softly under Miss Marple's sensible shoes, and a small frayed rug lay before the counter. its burgundy threads worn thin by years of footsteps. Mr. Reginald Hawthorne stood behind the counter, his thin frame slightly stooped, his pince-nez catching the light as he polished it with a trembling hand. He looked up as Miss Marple entered, his expression a mixture of relief and anxiety. "You've come back, Miss Marple," he said, his voice strained. "I hardly know what to do." "The police, Constable Reed, came by, but he says there's little to go on. No broken glass, no forced locks. It's as if the book simply evaporated." Miss Marple's blue eyes, deceptively mild, surveyed the shop with the precision of a cartographer mapping uncharted terrain. "Evaporated, Mr. Hawthorne. Books, like people, do not vanish without reason. Let us examine the scene together, shall we?" Her tone was gentle, but there was a firmness beneath it, a quiet insistence that invited no refusal. She approached the display case, her hands clasped lightly before her, and studied its construction. The case was a handsome piece, its oak frame carved with subtle flourishes, its glass panels thick and unblemished. The lock, a sturdy brass mechanism, was set into the front panel, its keyhole gleaming as if recently polished. Miss Marple bent slightly, her shawl brushing the floor, and peered at the lock's surface. No scratches, no signs of tampering. The velvet cushion inside, once the codex's throne, lay empty, its indigo folds undisturbed, save for a faint indentation where the book had rested. "Tell me, Mr. Hawthorne," she said, straightening, "how often do you open this case? And who else might have seen the key?" Hawthorne hesitated, his fingers twisting the cloth he held. "I open it rarely, only to show the codex to serious buyers or scholars. The key hangs on a hook behind the counter." He gestured to a brass hook nailed to the wall, where a single key dangled, its bow ornate but worn. "It's always there, out of sight, unless you know where to look. I suppose anyone who's been behind the counter might have noticed it." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the counter itself. It was a solid oak affair, cluttered with ledgers, a brass inkstand, and a small stack of book catalogues. Near the edge, she spotted a faint smudge of wax, barely noticeable against the wood's dark grain. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "Do you use candles in the shop, Mr. Hawthorne?" she asked, her voice as casual as if she were inquiring about his tea preferences. "Candles?" "No, not at all," he replied, frowning. "The electric light is quite sufficient, though we've had the odd outage." "But not last night. The bulb was working when I locked up." "Interesting," Miss Marple murmured, filing the wax smudge away in her mind's meticulous archive. She turned her attention to the floor, where a faint scuff mark caught her eye, just to the left of the display case. It was subtle, a crescent-shaped abrasion in the polish, as if someone had pivoted sharply on a heel. She knelt, ignoring the creak of her knees, and traced the mark with a finger. It suggested a man's shoe, size 10 perhaps, with a worn sole, a detail that might mean nothing or everything. The shop's layout offered further clues. The front door, heavy oak with a Yale lock, showed no signs of forced entry. 2 small windows flanked it, their latches secure, their panes too narrow for a grown person to pass through. A back door, leading to an alley, was bolted from the inside, its key resting in a dish on a nearby shelf. Miss Marple tested the bolt. It slid smoothly, well-oiled, suggesting recent use. "Do you often use the back door, Mr. Hawthorne?" she asked. "Only for deliveries," he said, his brow furrowing. "Booksellers send crates that way sometimes, but it was bolted last night, I checked." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the back door, then returned to the shop's interior. The shelves formed a maze, their heights varying from waist-high to towering above her head. A narrow staircase in one corner led to a loft where Hawthorne stored less valuable stock. She climbed it carefully, her hand on the banister, and found the loft cramped but orderly, with crates of books and a small desk covered in papers. Nothing seemed amiss, yet she noted the dust on the floor, undisturbed, save for a single set of footprints leading to the desk. They matched the size and wear of the scuff mark below. Descending, she turned her attention to the customers who had visited the previous day. "You mentioned Miss Wentworth, Doctor." "Quill and Mr. Langston," she said, settling into a chair near the counter, her knitting bag at her feet. "Tell me about them." "Every detail, if you please." Hawthorne sighed, adjusting his pince-nez. "Miss Clara Wentworth came in around noon. She's a regular, always browsing but rarely buying. Yesterday, she lingered near the codex, asking about the case, how secure it was, whether it was alarmed. I thought it odd, but she's a nervous sort, always fidgeting. Dr. Ernest Quill arrived in the afternoon. He's a scholar, you know, mad for medieval texts. He asked to see the codex up close, so I opened the case. He spent an hour poring over it, muttering about alchemical symbols. Seemed harmless, but intense, as for Mr. Victor Langston, he came just before closing. He's a collector, wealthy as Croesus. Offered £15,000 for the codex, but I refused. He didn't seem pleased. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she drew wool from her bag, her hands moving with the rhythm of habit. "And you, Mr. Hawthorne? You were here all day." "From 9 to 6, he confirmed. "I locked the case after Doctor." Quill left, checked the doors, and went home. "I live above the shop, you see, so I'd have heard any disturbance, but there was nothing at all." Her eyes flickered to the key on its hook. "And no one else has a key to the shop?" "No one," he said firmly. "I'm the only one." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving threads of possibility. The codex was no trifle. Its illuminated pages, filled with cryptic diagrams and Latin script, were a magnet for scholars and collectors alike. Its theft required not only opportunity but audacity. She rose, her shawl slipping slightly, and paced the shop's perimeter, her gaze sweeping over every surface. A small brass bell on the counter caught her eye, its surface dull with fingerprints. She wondered whose hands had touched it last. "Constable Reed will want to know all this," she said, though her tone suggested she placed little faith in the constable's deductive powers. "But I think, Mr. Hawthorne, that we must look closer. People, you know, are not always what they seem. Even in St. Mary, Meade Hawthorne's face paled, and he nodded mutely. Miss Marple's words, gentle as they were, carried a weight that unsettled him. She stepped toward the door, pausing to glance at the display case once more. The empty cushion seemed to mock her, a silent challenge to her understanding of human nature. She knew that theft, like any sin, left traces, not just in scuff marks or wax smudges, but in the glances, hesitations, and half-truths of those involved. As she stepped into the fading light, the village clock struck 3, its chimes a reminder that time, like truth, was slipping away. Her thoughts turned to the suspects. Mrs. Wentworth's nervous questions about the case suggested more than idle curiosity. Dr. Quill's obsession with the codex's symbols hinted at a mind consumed by knowledge, perhaps to a dangerous degree. Mr. Langston's wealth and ambition made him a formidable figure, his rebuffed offer a potential spark for resentment. And Mr. Hawthorne himself, his strained finances and intimate knowledge of the shop could not be dismissed. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. She had seen such puzzles before, in the quiet corners of village life, where greed and passion simmered beneath polite facades. As she walked home, the leaves crunching underfoot, she resolved to visit each suspect in turn. The codex had not evaporated. It had been taken, and the hand that took it had left clues, however faint. In her cottage, by the fire, she would knit and think, letting the threads of the mystery untangle in her mind. St. Mary Mead might be a small stage, but its dramas, she knew, were as intricate as any in London or Paris. And Miss Jane Marple, with her unassuming air and relentless curiosity, was ready to play her part. Chapter 3. The suspects emerge. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the spire of St. Mary Mead's church, casting a golden haze over the village as Miss Jane Marple sat in her rose-draped cottage, her knitting needles clicking with the steady rhythm of a metronome. Her parlour was a picture of cosy order. A chintz-covered armchair, a low table bearing a teapot and a single bone china cup, and a window overlooking the garden where dahlias nodded in the breeze. Yet her mind was far from the tranquil scene. The theft of the luminous codex from parchment and quill had stirred her curiosity, and she knew that in a village like St. Mary Mead, secrets were as common as blackbirds, hidden in plain sight behind polite smiles and drawn curtains. She sipped her tea, Earl Grey with a hint of bergamot, and considered the 4 individuals who had crossed the shop's threshold the day before the theft. Each, in their way, had a connection to the codex, a manuscript not only valuable, but imbued with an almost mystical allure, its alchemical symbols promising revelations to those who could decipher them. Miss Marple's experience of human nature, honed over years of observing village intrigues, told her that motive often lay in the quiet corners of character. A flicker of envy, a spark of ambition, a shadow of desperation. She set her cup down and drew a small notebook from her knitting bag, its pages filled with her neat, spidery script. It was time to consider the suspects. First, there was Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, the shopkeeper himself. A man in his 60s, with a scholar's stoop and a fastidious manner, he had built parchment and quill into a haven for rare books, his pride evident in every polished shelf. Yet Miss Marple had noted the strain in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he spoke of the theft. His claim of financial stability seemed at odds with the village whispers, picked up at the post office, of unpaid bills and a rival bookseller in nearby Much Benham siphoning his trade. Could a man so devoted to his books orchestrate a theft, perhaps to claim insurance or settle debts? The key to the display case hung behind his counter, a fact he alone controlled. Yet his distress had seemed genuine, his voice breaking as he described the empty velvet cushion. Miss Marple underlined his name in her notebook, adding a question mark. Next was Miss Clara Wentworth, a spinster of 40-odd years, known for her nervous habits and a penchant for collecting porcelain cats. She lived in a modest cottage on Willow Lane, its windows perpetually shuttered. Her presence in the shop was unremarkable. She was a frequent browser, her fingers fluttering over bindings she could rarely afford. But her questions about the display case's security, as reported by Hawthorne, were peculiar. Why would a woman with no apparent interest in rare books inquire about locks. Miss Marple recalled her at the church bazaar, her eyes darting as if expecting pursuit, her purse clutched tightly. Was it mere curiosity, or something more calculated? Miss Marple wrote Wentworth, motive, and circled it. Dr. Ernest Quill, the third suspect, was a figure of intellectual intensity. A scholar of medieval manuscripts, he had a wiry frame and ink-stained fingers that betrayed his obsession with the written word. His study, rumoured to be a chaos of papers and arcane texts, was a short walk from the village. In a converted barn overlooking the meadows. His visit to examine the codex had been marked by fervour. Hawthorne described him lingering over its pages, muttering about symbols that hinted at alchemical secrets. Miss Marple, who had once heard him lecture at the village hall, knew his passion bordered on mania. Could such devotion drive him to theft, to possess what he could not afford? His academic salary was modest, and the codex was far beyond his means. She jotted Quill Obsession and drew a line beneath it. Finally, there was Mr. Victor Langston, a collector whose wealth cast a long shadow over St. Mary Mead. His manor, perched on the village's edge, was a fortress of opulence, its gates guarded by wrought-iron lions. Langston was a man of polished charm. His tailored suits and gold watch chain, a stark contrast to the village's homespun simplicity. His offer of £15,000 for the codex, rebuffed by Hawthorne, had been the talk of the tea shop. Miss Marple had met him once at a charity auction, and noted the intensity in his gaze when he spoke of rare books, as if they were trophies to be claimed. A man accustomed to acquiring what he desired might not take kindly to refusal. Could his wealth have bought silence or access to a key? She wrote Langston Pride and paused, her pen hovering. Miss Marple leaned back, her needle still for a moment as she gazed out the window. The village was settling into evening. The lamplighter making his rounds, his pole clicking against the gas lamps. She knew that each suspect had been near the codex, each with opportunity to observe the key's hiding place or the shop's routines. But opportunity alone was not enough. The thief needed nerve, and perhaps a touch of cunning. The display case's lock, unforced, suggested either a key or a skilled hand at picking. The wax smudge on the counter, the scuff mark on the floor. Small details, but in her experience, small details were the threads that unravelled the tightest knots. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and decided to pay a call on the vicarage. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, was a font of village gossip, her ear attuned to every whisper of scandal or oddity. Over tea and scones, Miss Marple might glean something new, a chance remark, a forgotten sighting, that could illuminate the puzzle. She tucked her notebook into her bag, beside her knitting, and donned her hat. A sensible affair with a single feather. As she stepped into the twilight, the air cool against her cheeks, she felt the familiar thrill of the chase. Not for foxes, but for truth. The vicarage was a short walk, past the butcher's and the post office, where curtains twitched as she passed. Mrs. Clement greeted her with a warm smile, ushering her into a parlour fragrant with lavender and beeswax. "Jane, how dreadful about Mr. Hawthorne's book," she exclaimed, pouring tea into cups adorned with violets. "The whole village is talking. They say it's worth a fortune. Imagine, stolen right from under his nose." Miss Marple accepted a cup, her expression serene. "It is curious, isn't it? I wonder if you've heard anything unusual about Mr. Hawthorne, perhaps, or his visitors yesterday." Mrs. Clement's eyes gleamed, eager to share. Well, now that you mention it, I did hear something. Mrs. Price from the bakery saw Miss Wentworth near the shop just after closing, looking quite furtive. She was carrying a parcel, though it might have been her shopping. And then there's Doctor Quill. My maid says he was in the alley behind the shop last week, scribbling in that notebook of his. As for Mr. Langston, well, everyone knows he's got more money than sense, but the vicar heard he's been asking about locksmiths in Much Benham. Locksmiths of all things! Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her hands steady as her mind raced. A parcel, a notebook, a locksmith, each a fragment, like pieces of a shattered teacup. She thanked Mrs. Clement, promising to return for the next church committee meeting, and made her way home, the gas lamps now glowing in the dusk. Back in her parlour, she opened her notebook and added these new details, her pen moving with deliberate care. The codex was out there, hidden in a drawer or a safe, its thief believing themselves clever. But Miss Marple knew that cleverness often tripped over its own pride, and she intended to be there when it did. As she prepared for bed, the village clock chimed 9, its notes carrying across the quiet lanes. She thought of the suspects, their faces clear in her mind. Hawthorne's anxious frown, Wentworth's nervous flutter, Quill's fevered intensity, Langston's polished smile. One of them had crossed a line, driven by want or need or something deeper. Tomorrow she would begin her inquiries, starting with Miss Wentworth, whose furtive parcel intrigued her most. For now, she banked the fire and climbed the stairs, her mind already weaving the threads of St. Mary Mead's latest mystery into a pattern only she could see. Chapter 4. The Shopkeeper's Tale. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of the village as Miss Jane Marple made her way along Willow Lane. Her destination was Parchment and Quill, where the theft of the luminous codex had cast a pall over Mr. Reginald Hawthorne's tidy world. The shopkeeper, with his scholar's stoop and anxious air, was the first thread in the tapestry of suspects, and Miss Marple, her knitting bag swinging gently at her side, intended to tug at that thread with care. Her steps were brisk despite her age, her sensible shoes tapping the cobbles, and her mind, sharp as the frost in the air, was already piecing together the puzzle of the stolen manuscript. The shop's bell chimed as she entered, and she found Mr. Hawthorne at his counter, sorting a stack of invoices with a distracted air. His pince-nez hung low on his nose, and his grey hair, usually so neatly combed, bore the marks of restless fingers. The shop itself was unchanged. Shelves laden with ancient volumes, the empty display case standing like a silent accusation at the room's centre. The faint scent of wax and old paper lingered, and Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the smudge on the counter she had noticed before, its presence still unexplained. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice as warm as the tea she craved on this chilly morning. "I thought I might trouble you for a few moments. This business with the codex, it's quite vexing, and I find myself curious about the details." Hawthorne looked up, his expression a blend of weariness and gratitude. "Miss Marple, you're kind to take an interest. I'm at my wit's end. Constable Reed has been no help. Says it's likely a professional thief from London, but I can't see how. The locks, the doors, all untouched." He gestured helplessly toward the display case, its glass gleaming mockingly in the morning light. Miss Marple settled into a chair near the counter, drawing her shawl closer. "Let us go over it then. Step by step, if you please. Tell me about your day. Yesterday, was it?" "From the moment you opened the shop." Hawthorne sighed, setting aside his invoices. "I opened at 9, as always. Swept the floor, dusted the shelves, checked the codex in its case. It was there, Miss Marple, safe, under lock and key. I'd have noticed if anything was amiss. The morning was quiet, just a few browsers, none serious. Miss Wentworth came in around noon, poking about as usual. Asked about the case, which struck me as odd, but I thought little of it then. Dr. Quill arrived after lunch, full of his usual fervour. Wanted to study the codex's engravings, so I opened the case for him. He was careful, I'll give him that, handled it with gloves, made notes in that little book of his. Then Mr. Langston came near closing, all charm and money, offered £15,000 for the codex, but I told him it wasn't for sale. He left in a huff. I think Miss Marple's needles emerged from her bag, clicking softly as she listened. And after Mr. Langston left, what then? I locked the case, checked the doors, front and back, and turned off the light. Went upstairs to my flat, had supper, and read until bedtime. I heard nothing, saw nothing. My flat's right above the shop, you know. A creaking floorboard would have woken me. Her eyes, deceptively mild, studied him closely. His hands, she noted, trembled slightly as he spoke, and a faint sheen of perspiration glistened on his brow despite the cool air. "Your flat," she said thoughtfully. "You've lived there long." 20 years, he replied. "Since I opened the shop. It's modest, but it suits me. The stairs are steep, mind you. I don't go down once I'm up for the night. And your finances, Mr. Hawthorne? Forgive me, but a book like the Codex must be a great responsibility. The shop, it's thriving, I trust." His face tightened, and for a moment she thought he might deflect. But he sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Not as it was, Miss Marple. There's a new bookseller in Much Benham, sells at lower prices, draws my customers. I've had to borrow a bit to keep things afloat. The Codex was my pride, but also my security. I'd hoped to sell it one day, but only for the right price, to the right buyer." Miss Marple nodded, her needles never pausing. "And insurance? Was the Codex covered? Yes, though not for its full value. £10,000, perhaps. Enough to tide me over, but—" He trailed off, his eyes darting to the display case. "I'd never part with it willingly, Miss Marple. It's not just the money. It's what that book represents. Centuries of knowledge, beauty." His voice broke, and Miss Marple's heart softened, though her mind remained as keen as ever. She rose, crossing to the display case, and examined the lock again. Its brass surface was unmarred, the keyhole pristine. "This lock," she said, "it's quite sturdy. You've had it long. Since I bought the case, 10 years ago. Never had trouble with it. The key's unique. Only one exists, and it's always on that hook." He pointed to the brass hook behind the counter, where the key gleamed faintly. She turned her attention to the counter, her fingers brushing the wax, smudge she had seen before. And this wax, still a mystery, I suppose? Hawthorne frowned, peering at the spot. "I hadn't noticed." "Perhaps from a customer's candle, though I can't imagine why." The shop's well lit. Even during outages, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the floor, where the scuff mark near the case remained, a faint crescent in the polish. She knelt, her joints protesting, and studied it closely. The mark suggested a man's shoe, worn at the heel, but it told her little more. Rising, she glanced at the back door, its bolt still smooth and well-oiled. "You mentioned deliveries," she said. "When was the last one?" "Last week," Hawthorne replied. "A crate of novels from London. I took it in myself, bolted the door after. No one's used it since she nodded, her mind cataloguing each detail. The untouched lock, the wax smudge, the scuff mark, the bolted door. Hawthorne's story was consistent, but consistency, she knew, could be a mask. His financial strain was a motive, however slight, and his access to the key undeniable. Yet his distress seemed too raw for artifice, his devotion to the Codex too heartfelt. She thought of her nephew Raymond, who once remarked that passion could blind a man to his own actions. Could Hawthorne, in a moment of desperation, have acted against his own principles? "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne," she said, tucking her knitting away. "You've been most helpful. I think I shall take a walk, clear my head. This puzzle is a knotty one, but knots, you know, have a way of coming undone." He managed a weak smile, and she stepped into the street, the mist now lifting to reveal a pale blue sky. As she walked, she considered her next step. Miss Wentworth's furtive parcel, mentioned by Mrs. Clement, intrigued her. A nervous woman with a curious interest in locks might have secrets worth uncovering. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, its feather bobbing, and turned toward Willow Lane. The Codex was out there, its gilded pages hidden in some shadowed corner, and she meant to find it, not by force, but by the quiet, relentless logic of observation. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, the truth often lay in the smallest gestures, and Miss Marple was a master at reading them. Chapter 5. The Curious Customer, the Lanes of St. Mary Mead were quiet in the late morning, the mist having burned away to reveal a sky of pale, unblemished blue. Miss Jane Marple walked with her usual measured pace along Willow Lane, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, her eyes taking in the familiar sights. The butcher's boy whistling as he pedalled past, the postman's satchel swinging, the faint clatter of teacups from an open window. Her destination was the cottage of Miss Clara Wentworth, a woman whose nervous demeanour and curious questions about parchment and quill security had piqued Miss Marple's interest. In a village where secrets were currency, Miss Wentworth's furtive parcel, glimpsed by the baker's wife, was a coin worth examining. The cottage stood at the lane's end, a modest affair with peeling whitewash and a garden overgrown with nettles. Its windows were shuttered, giving it a closed, secretive air, and a chipped porcelain cat guarded the doorstep. Miss Marple knocked, her gloved hand firm but polite, and waited. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Miss Wentworth. Her thin frame swathed in a faded cardigan, her eyes darting like those of a startled hare. Her hair, a mousy brown streaked with grey, was pinned haphazardly, and her fingers clutched a handkerchief as if it were a lifeline. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice high and tremulous. "What a surprise! Do come in, please." Her words were welcoming, but her glance flickered to the street as if checking for unseen watchers. The parlour was small and cluttered, every surface adorned with porcelain cats in various poses, crouching, preening, sleeping. A faint smell of lavender and damp hung in the air, and the furniture, though clean, bore the marks of long use. A sagging sofa, a table with a wobbly leg, a hearth where a meagre fire sputtered. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her shawl draped neatly over her knees, and accepted a cup of weak tea from a chipped pot. Her needles emerged, clicking softly, a rhythm that seemed to steady the room's nervous energy. "I won't keep you long, Miss Wentworth," she began, her tone as gentle as the breeze outside. "I've been speaking with Mr. Hawthorne about the unfortunate business at his shop. The luminous codex, such a loss. You were there yesterday, I understand." Miss Wentworth's hand trembled, sloshing tea into her saucer. "Yes, I was. Just browsing, you know. I often go to Parchment and Quill. The books, they're so lovely, even if I can't afford them." Her eyes darted to a corner where a small writing desk stood, its surface cluttered with papers and a single candle stub. Miss Marple's gaze followed, noting the candle's presence. "You asked about the display case, I believe? Its security, perhaps?" A flush crept up Miss Wentworth's neck. "Did I? Oh, I suppose I did. I was curious, that's all. It's such a valuable book, and the case looked so solid. I wondered how safe it was." Her handkerchief twisted in her hands, the fabric fraying at the edges. "Quite natural," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "Though it's an unusual question for a casual visitor." "You've an eye for detail, Miss Wentworth." Her tone was kind, but her eyes, sharp behind their mildness, watched every flicker of expression. Miss Wentworth laughed, a brittle sound. "Oh, I'm not clever like that. I like to know things. The shop feels so old, so full of secrets. I thought perhaps they had alarms or something modern." Miss Marple sipped her tea, finding it bitter but drinkable. "And did you notice anything else? The key to the case, perhaps, or anyone, lingering near it?" "No, nothing," Miss Wentworth said quickly. Too quickly, Miss Marple thought. "I was only there a short while. Looked at some novels, then left. Mr. Hawthorne was busy, and Dr. Quill was there, scribbling away. That's all I remember." Miss Marple nodded, her mind snagging on the haste of the denial. She recalled Mrs. Clement's gossip. Miss Wentworth seen near the shop after closing, clutching a parcel. "You left before closing, then?" "I suppose you were home by evening. The village is so quiet at night, isn't it?" Miss Wentworth's eyes widened, and her handkerchief twisted tighter. "Yes, home. I had errands, but I was here by supper. Just me and my cats." She gestured to a porcelain tabby, its painted eyes staring blankly. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the writing desk, where a scrap of paper peeked from beneath a blotter. It bore the shop's closing hours, scrawled in pencil, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., an odd thing to note for a casual browser. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and approached the desk under the pretense of admiring a figurine. "Such charming cats," she said, her fingers brushing the paper. "Do you collect anything else? Old books, perhaps?" "Oh, no," Miss Wentworth said, standing abruptly. "Books are too dear for me. I just like to look." Her voice was sharp, and she moved to the desk, nudging the paper out of sight. Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "Of course. It's the look-in that matters, isn't it? Like window shopping for dreams." She returned to her chair, her needles resuming their dance. "I heard you were seen near the shop after hours, carrying a parcel." "Shopping, perhaps?" Miss Wentworth froze, her face paling. "A parcel? Oh, that must have been groceries. Yes, I stopped at the butcher's. Mrs. Price must have seen me. People do talk, don't they?" Her laugh was strained, and her eyes flicked to the door. "Indeed they do," Miss Marple said, her tone as soft as her shawl. "Village life is full of eyes and ears, but it's all so easily misunderstood, isn't it?" She set her cup down and stood, her movements deliberate. "Thank you for the tea, Miss Wentworth. I mustn't keep you from your day." As she stepped into the lane, the door closing swiftly behind her, Miss Marple's mind was alight with observations. The candle stub on the desk, its wax a match for the smudge in the shop, was a curious coincidence. The scribbled hours, the nervous denial, the parcel, each was a thread, thin but suggestive. Miss Wentworth's anxiety was palpable, but was it guilt or merely the fear of being noticed? Miss Marple thought of her old friend Dolly Bantry, who once said that nervous people were like sparrows, quick to flutter, but not always hiding a crime. She turned toward the village centre, her next destination doctor, Quill's study. The scholar's obsession with the Codex's symbols intrigued her, and his presence in the shop, scribbling notes, suggested a mind too focused for innocence. As she walked, the village stirred around her, children playing near the green, the blacksmith's hammer ringing, the scent of fresh bread wafting from the bakery. Miss Marple's eyes, ever watchful, caught the twitch of a curtain across the street. Someone was watching, perhaps Miss Wentworth, or perhaps another pair of eyes, drawn to the mystery of the stolen codex. In her mind, she arranged the pieces. The unforced lock, the wax smudge, the scuff mark, Miss Wentworth's trembling hands. The codex was a prize, its allure not just in its value, but in its secrets. Secrets that might drive a scholar to theft, a collector to greed, or a nervous spinster to unexpected boldness. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, its feather catching the breeze, and smiled faintly. The truth, she knew, was like her knitting, a matter of patience, of following each thread to its end, and she was very patient indeed. Chapter 6. The Scholar's Obsession. The sun was climbing toward its zenith as Miss Jane Marple made her way across the meadows that fringed St. Mary Mead, her steps steady despite the uneven ground. Her destination was the converted barn where Dr. Ernest Quill, the village's resident scholar of medieval manuscripts, kept his study. The air was crisp, scented with damp grass and the faint tang of wood smoke, and Miss Marple's mind was as clear as the sky above, turning over the threads of the mystery surrounding the luminous codex. Miss Clara Wentworth's nervous denials and the curious wax smudge in her cottage had sharpened her curiosity. But Dr. Quill's intense fascination with the stolen manuscript promised a different kind of knot to unravel. Her knitting bag swung lightly at her side, a comforting weight as she approached the barn, its weathered timbers silvered by years of rain and sun. The barn stood apart from the village, its isolation suiting a man who preferred the company of ancient texts to that of his neighbours. A narrow path led to its door, flanked by overgrown brambles that snagged at Miss Marple's skirt. She knocked, the sound echoing in the still air, and after a moment, Dr. Quill appeared, his wiry frame clad in a threadbare tweed jacket. His face, lined and sharp, lit with surprise, and his eyes, bright behind smudged spectacles, held a flicker of wariness. Ink stains marked his fingers, and a pencil was tucked behind one ear, giving him the air of a man perpetually interrupted in mid-thought. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped but courteous. "An unexpected pleasure. To what do I owe the visit?" He stepped aside, gesturing her into the barn with a hand that trembled slightly. Whether from excitement or nerves, she could not yet tell. The interior was a scholar's chaos, a labyrinth of books and papers that seemed to defy gravity. Shelves lined every wall, sagging under the weight of tomes in Latin, Greek, and Old English. A long table dominated the centre, strewn with manuscripts, quills, and bottles of ink, while a single window let in a shaft of light that illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. A faint smell of mildew and wax hung about, and Miss Marple's eyes caught the glint of a brass candlestick on the table, its base encrusted with drips of wax. She filed this away, her expression as serene as ever, and settled into a creaking chair, her knitting bag at her feet. "I've been speaking with Mr. Hawthorne about the codex," she began, her tone light, as if discussing the weather. "A dreadful loss, don't you think? You saw it yesterday, I believe, in the shop." Dr. Quill's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, easing into a chair opposite her. "Yes, I did." "A remarkable work, 16th century Venetian, with alchemical engravings unlike any I've studied. I spent an hour with it, taking notes. Hawthorne was kind enough to open the case." His voice warmed as he spoke, his hands gesturing as if tracing the book's illuminated pages. Miss Marple's needles emerged, clicking softly. "You must have been captivated. I understand the codex holds secrets, symbols, perhaps, that only a scholar like yourself could decipher." His face lit up, a spark of fervour in his eyes. "Exactly. The engravings are a cipher, I'm certain. A blend of alchemical and astrological signs, hinting at processes lost to time. I've been cross-referencing them with my own text." He gestured to a stack of books, their pages bristling with bookmarks. "If I could just study it further, I might unlock its meaning. But now—" His voice faltered, and he looked away, his fingers drumming on the table. Miss Marple's gaze was gentle but unyielding. "A great pity its loss. You spent some time with it, you say. Did you notice anything unusual in the shop? The case, perhaps, or the key?" Dr. Quill hesitated, his fingers stilling. "The case? It was sturdy, locked tight when I left. The key was on its hook. I saw Hawthorne put it there. Nothing out of the ordinary, though. I was focused on the codex, not the shop's fittings." His tone was careful, and Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his jaw. She leaned forward, her needles pausing. "And the shop itself? You've been there often, I imagine. You must know its corners well. Well enough," he admitted. "I visit weekly, sometimes more. Hawthorne's collection is modest but choice. The codex was the jewel, of course." His eyes flicked to a notebook on the table, its cover worn and stained. It lay open, revealing a sketch of the codex's title page, complete with intricate symbols and a detailed drawing of the display case's lock. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. "What a fine sketch," she said, nodding toward the notebook. "You've an artist's hand. The lock, too." Such precision. Dr. Quill flushed, reaching to close the notebook, but not before she glimpsed a diagram of the Beku. "Case's mechanism, annotated with measurements." "Just notes," he said quickly. "I like to be thorough." "The codex's context, its display, its protection, matters to my research." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "A scholar's mind sees everything. Though I wonder, did you notice anyone else in the shop? Miss Wentworth, perhaps? Or Mr. Langston?" "Miss Wentworth was there when I arrived," he said, his voice steadying, "poking about, asking silly questions about the case. She left soon after. Langston came later, all bluster and money. Tried to buy the codex on the spot, but Hawthorne wouldn't hear of it. I left before him, had to get back to my work." He gestured to the cluttered table as if to prove his dedication. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. "And last night? You were here, I suppose, working late as scholars do?" "Here all evening," he said firmly. "Translating a 14th century treatise. Fell asleep at my desk, I'm afraid." He smiled thinly, but his eyes darted to the candlestick, and Miss Marple wondered if its wax matched the smudge in the shop. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and glanced around the study. A narrow door led to a back room, its contents hidden, and a trapdoor in the floor suggested a cellar below. "Such a fascinating place," she said, her tone admiring. "So much knowledge, tucked away." "You must guard it carefully, I do," he said, standing to usher her out. "Books are my life, Miss Marple. I'd do anything to protect them, or to study them." His words were earnest, but there was a fervour in his tone that bordered on obsession. As she stepped into the meadow, the barn door closing behind her, Miss Marple's mind was alight with new threads. The sketch of the lock, so meticulously drawn, suggested more than scholarly curiosity. Dr. Quill's passion for the codex was undeniable, but could it have driven him to theft? His solitary habits, his late-night work, his knowledge of the shop's routines, all pointed to opportunity. Yet his fervour seemed to spring from a desire to understand, not possess. She thought of her old friend Sir Henry Clithering, who once said that obsession could blind a man to morality, and wondered if Dr. Quill's mind, so sharp in its pursuit of knowledge, had strayed into shadow. Her next visit would be to Mr. Victor Langston, the collector whose wealth and ambition made him a formidable figure. As she walked back to the village, the meadows stretching green and gold around her, she considered the wax smudge, the scuff mark, the unforced lock. Dr. Quill's candlestick was a clue, perhaps, but clues were like her knitting. They needed context to form a pattern. The codex was hidden somewhere, its secrets locked away. But Miss Marple knew that secrets like books had a way of being opened by those who knew where to look. With a faint smile, she adjusted her hat and pressed on, her mind weaving the mystery's threads with quiet, relentless precision. Chapter 7. The Collector's Ambition. The late afternoon light bathed St. Mary Mead in a soft golden glow as Miss Jane Marple approached the imposing gates of Langston Manor, the residence of Mr. Victor Langston, the wealthy collector whose offer for the luminous codex had been rebuffed by Mr. Hawthorne. The manor stood at the village's edge, its stone facade adorned with ivy, its wrought-iron gates flanked by two stern lions that seemed to guard the secrets within. Miss Marple's sensible shoes crunched on the gravel drive, her knitting bag a familiar weight at her side, and her mind, ever sharp beneath its mild exterior, was alert to the nuances of wealth and ambition. Dr. Quill's fervent sketches and Miss Wentworth's nervous denials had woven new threads into the mystery, but Langston, with his polished charm and deep pockets, promised a different kind of challenge. She rang the bell, its chime echoing across the manicured lawn, and a butler appeared, his livery impeccable, his expression one of polite inquiry. "Miss Marple, to see Mr. Langston," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "A small matter concerning parchment and quill." The butler nodded, leading her through a grand hall lined with portraits, their gilt frames gleaming under crystal chandeliers. The air carried the scent of polished wood and old money, and Miss Marple's eyes noted the artefacts displayed in alcoves. A jade statuette, a silver chalice, a fragment of Egyptian papyrus. Langston's passion for collecting was evident, each piece a testament to his desire to possess the rare and beautiful. She was ushered into a library, a vast room with soaring shelves and a long table strewn with catalogues and magnifying glasses. At its centre stood Mr. Victor Langston, his tailored suit as immaculate as his reputation, his dark hair slicked back, a gold watch chain glinting at his waist. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished oak. "What an unexpected pleasure. Do sit down. May I offer you sherry?" His smile was warm, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, assessed her as if she were a rare manuscript to be appraised. "Thank you, Mr. Langston," she replied, settling into a leather chair, her shawl draped neatly over her knees. "Sherry would be lovely." "I've come about the unfortunate theft at Mr. Hawthorne's shop. The luminous codex, such a loss. You were there yesterday, I understand, with an interest in the book." Langston poured 2 glasses of sherry from a crystal decanter, his movements deliberate. "Indeed I was," he said, handing her a glass. "A magnificent work, Venetian, 16th century, with illuminations that rival the best of its era. I offered £15,000, a fair sum, but Hawthorne wouldn't part with it. Pity, really. Now it's gone, and who knows where?" He sighed, though Miss Marple noted a lack of genuine regret in his tone. Her needles emerged, clicking softly as she sipped the sherry, its warmth spreading through her. "A great pity, yes. You must have been disappointed, having set your heart on it. A collector like yourself, such a piece would be a crown jewel." Langston leaned back, his fingers steepled. "I won't deny it. My library is my pride, Miss Marple. I collect not just for beauty, but for legacy. The codex would have been a centerpiece, but I respect Hawthorne's decision. As for the theft, I'm as baffled as anyone. The shop seemed secure, locked tight, no alarms, but that case was sturdy." His eyes flicked to her, gauging her reaction. Miss Marple's gaze wandered the room, lingering on the locked cabinets that lined the walls, their glass doors revealing rows of leather-bound volumes. "Your collection is remarkable," she said. "Do you ever open these cabinets for guests? Or are they as secure as Mr. Hawthorne's case?" He smiled, a touch of pride in his expression. "Secure as Fort Knox. Each has a unique lock, and I keep the keys on me." He patted his waistcoat, where a faint jingle suggested a keyring. "I've had too many rare items to risk carelessness." "A collector learns caution, Miss Marple." "Quite so," she said, her needle steady. "Though caution can't always prevent loss. Tell me, what did you notice in the shop? The key to the case, perhaps? Or anyone acting oddly?" Langston sipped his sherry, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The key? I didn't see it, though I assume Hawthorne keeps it close. As for others, Doctor..." Quill was there, hunched over his notes like a vulture. Miss Wentworth flitted about, asking foolish questions about alarms. I paid them little mind. I was focused on the codex. Hawthorne let me view it briefly, but he was firm about not selling. I left soon after, around 5, I'd say. Miss Marple nodded, her mind snagging on his casual dismissal of the key. "And last night?" "You were here, I suppose, in this splendid library." "Here all evening," he said smoothly. "Cataloguing a new acquisition, a first edition Montaigne. My butler can confirm I didn't leave the manor." His tone was confident, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward a cabinet in the corner, its lock gleaming brighter than the others. She rose, setting her glass down, and approached the cabinet under the pretense of admiring its contents. "Such treasures," she murmured, noting a faint scratch near the lock, as if a key had missed its mark in haste. "Do you ever use candles here? For ambience, perhaps?" "Candles?" Langston's brow furrowed. "No, the electric lights are more than adequate." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just a thought," she said, her tone airy. "Old houses, old books, They seem to call for candlelight, don't they?" She returned to her chair, her eyes catching a small brass candlestick on a side table, its base free of wax but polished to a high sheen as if recently cleaned. Their conversation turned to village matters, Langston playing the gracious host, but Miss Marple sensed a guardedness beneath his charm. As she prepared to leave, thanking him for the sherry, she paused at the library door. "One last thing, Mr. Langston. You mentioned locksmiths to the vicar, I believe. An interest in security, perhaps?" His smile tightened, just for a moment. "A passing inquiry. I'm always looking to improve my cabinets. One can't be too careful with rare items." He escorted her to the hall, his manner impeccable, but his eyes watchful. As she walked down the gravel drive, the manor's shadow lengthening behind her, Miss Marple's mind was alive with new threads. Langston's wealth gave him means, his ambition motive, and his mention of locksmiths suggested a knowledge of locks that could bypass a key. The scratched cabinet, the polished candlestick, these were small things, but in her experience, small things were the hinges on which mysteries turned. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, who once remarked that rich men were like magpies, hoarding shiny things. Could Langston's desire for the codex have overcome his scruples? Her next task was to sift through the village's gossip, to see what else might surface about Langston's habits, or Miss Wentworth's parcel or doctor. Quill's late-night scribblings. As she reached the village green, the clock tower chimed 4, its notes carrying over the rooftops. The codex was out there, its gilded pages hidden in some locked drawer or secret nook, and Miss Marple knew that the collector's ambition, like any passion, could betray itself in the smallest slip. With a faint smile, she adjusted her hat and headed toward the post office, where tongues wagged and truths, however veiled, might be found. Chapter 8. A Village Whispers. The evening air in St. Mary Mead carried a chill as Miss Jane Marple walked toward the village centre, her shawl drawn tightly about her shoulders, and her knitting bag a familiar companion at her side. The lamps along High Street flickered to life, casting pools of light on the cobbles, and the village settled into the quiet rhythm of dusk. Her visits to Miss Wentworth, Dr. Quill, and Mr. Langston had woven a tapestry of motives, nervousness, obsession, ambition, but the theft of the luminous codex remained a puzzle, with too many missing pieces. Miss Marple knew that in a village like St. Mary Mead, where every glance and whisper held meaning, the truth often hid in the chatter of its residents. The post office, a hub of gossip as reliable as the church clock, was her next destination. The post office was a small cluttered shop, its counter strewn with stamps and parcels, its air thick with the scent of ink and sealing wax. Behind the counter stood Miss Lavender, a stout woman with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue, who dispensed gossip as freely as she did postage. A handful of villagers lingered, exchanging news under the guise of errands, their voices a low hum. Miss Marple entered, her smile as mild as the lamplight, and approached the counter, her knitting bag swinging gently. "Good evening, Miss Lavender," she said, her tone warm. "I've come for a few stamps, if you please. And perhaps a moment of your time. Such a to-do about Mr. Hawthorne's book, isn't it?" Miss Lavender's eyes gleamed, sensing a chance to share her store of village lore. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's dreadful. A book worth thousands vanished like a ghost. They say it's a professional job, but I say it's someone local. You mark my words, someone's hiding something." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mrs. Price from the bakery saw Miss Wentworth near the shop after closing yesterday. Clutching a parcel, she was, and looking like she'd seen a banshee. Odd, don't you think, for a woman who's all nerves and no money?" Miss Marple's needles emerged, clicking softly as she nodded. "Very odd indeed. Miss Wentworth does seem unsettled, though parcels can be innocent things. Groceries, perhaps." "Groceries!" Miss Lavender scoffed, sorting stamps with practised hands. "Mrs. Price swears it was book-shaped, wrapped in brown paper. And Miss Wentworth's not the sort to carry books about, not with her purse always pinched. I reckon she's up to something, snooping around after hours." Miss Marple filed this away, her mind revisiting the candle stub in Miss Wentworth's cottage and the scribbled shop hours on her desk. "Curious," she murmured. "And what of the others? Dr. Quill, perhaps? Or Mr. Langston?" Miss Lavender's brows rose, delighted to continue. "Dr. Quill, now there's a queer one. My nephew, the delivery boy, saw him in the alley behind Parchment and Quill last week, scribbling in that notebook of his. Looked like he was measuring something, windows maybe, or the back door. Said he was studying the architecture. But who studies a shop's alley? And Mr. Langston, well, the vicar's wife heard from her maid that he's had a new safe installed in his manor. Arrived 2 days ago, all hush-hush. Why'd a man need a safe in such a hurry unless he's got something to hide?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes bright with interest. "A safe? How intriguing! And Mr. Hawthorne himself, any talk about him?" "Oh, plenty," Miss Lavender said, lowering her voice further as a customer drifted near. "Mrs. Gibbs, the greengrocer's wife, says he was arguing with a stranger last week, right outside the shop. A rough sort, she said, not from the village. Hawthorne looked proper shaken after. And everyone knows his shop's struggling, bills piling up, customers going to Much Benham. If you ask me, he might have sold that book himself to pay his debts." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind racing. A parcel, an alley, a safe, an argument. Each was a thread, thin but vivid, in the fabric of the mystery. She purchased her stamps, thanked Miss Lavender, and stepped into the evening, the village now cloaked in twilight. As she walked toward the green, her thoughts turned to the suspects. Miss Wentworth's parcel suggested a secret, perhaps a book, though whether it was the codex remained unclear. Dr. Quill's alley sketches hinted at planning, his obsession with the codex a potential spur to action. Langston's safe was a bold clue, its timing suspicious, and his interest in locksmiths pointed to a skill that could unlock more than cabinets. And Hawthorne, his argument with a stranger, added a new figure to the puzzle, one that might explain his trembling hands. She paused by the church, its spire a dark silhouette against the sky, and considered her next move. The village's whispers were like her knitting. A pattern emerged only when you followed each stitch. She decided to revisit Parchment and Quill the next day, to examine the back door and the alley where Dr. Quill had been seen. The scuff mark, the wax smudge, the unforced lock. These were the stitches she had. But the stranger and the safe were new colours in her skein. As she reached her cottage, the clock tower chimed 7. Its notes a reminder that time was the thief's ally, but also hers. Inside, she lit the fire, its glow warming the parlour, and settled into her armchair with her knitting. Her notebook lay open, its pages filling with neat observations. Wentworth, parcel, book-shaped, Quill, alley, sketching door. Langston, safe, locksmiths, Hawthorne, stranger, debts. She thought of her old friend Sir Henry Clithering, who once said that villages were microcosms of human nature, their secrets as tangled as any cities. The codex was hidden, its thief cloaked in the village's quiet routines. But Miss Marple knew that whispers, like threads, could lead to the heart of a mystery. With a faint smile, she picked up her needles, ready to weave the next row in her quiet, relentless pursuit of the truth. Chapter 9. The Clue in the Dust. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the parlour floor, as she prepared for another day of quiet investigation. The theft of the luminous codex from parchment and quill had woven a web of suspicion around Mr. Hawthorne, Miss Wentworth, Doctor, Quill, and Mr. Langston, each with their own motives and secrets. The village's whispers, Miss Wentworth's parcel doctor, Quill's alley sketches, Mr. Langston's safe, and Mr. Hawthorne's mysterious stranger had added new threads to the mystery, but Miss Marple knew that the truth often lay in the overlooked details of the scene itself. With her knitting bag in hand and her mind as sharp as the pins within, she set out for the bookshop, determined to examine it anew. High Street was bustling with its usual morning rhythm, the milkman's cart rattling, the grocer's boy sweeping the pavement, the scent of fresh bread wafting from the bakery. Parchment and Quill stood serene amidst the activity, its mullioned windows reflecting the pale light. Miss Marple pushed open the door, the bells chime greeting her like an old friend. Mr. Hawthorne was at his counter, his pince-nez low on his nose, sorting a stack of dusty novels with a distracted air. His face, lined with worry, brightened slightly at her arrival. "Miss Marple," he said, setting aside a book. "Back again? I'm afraid there's no news. Constable Reed says it's a hopeless case. Likely a thief from London, long gone by now." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling with gentle determination. "Hopeless is a strong word, Mr. Hawthorne. I thought I might take another look, if you don't mind." Sometimes a fresh glance sees what was missed before he nodded, gesturing toward the shop. "By all means, I've nothing to hide, though I wish I'd more to offer. The codex, it's like a wound, its absence." She moved toward the display case at the shop's center, its empty velvet cushion a silent reproach. The oak frame and glass panels were as pristine as before, the brass lock unmarred by scratches or force. She knelt, her joints protesting, and studied the floor nearby, where the faint scuff mark she had noticed earlier remained, a crescent-shaped abrasion, suggesting a man's shoe with a worn heel. But her attention was drawn to a new detail, a thin layer of dust beneath the case, disturbed by a faint, irregular pattern, as if something had been dragged lightly across it. She traced it with a finger, noting its direction toward the back of the shop. "Mr. Hawthorne," she called, rising carefully. "Do you sweep the floor daily?" "Every morning," he replied, approaching. "Keeps the place tidy." "Why do you ask?" "This dust," she said, pointing. "It's settled since yesterday. And this mark, something brushed through it. Perhaps a bag or a coat hem. Curious, don't you think, in a shop so well kept?" Hawthorne frowned, peering at the spot. "I hadn't noticed. Could be from a customer's bag, I suppose. People are careless, brushing against things. Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful. She moved to the counter, where the wax smudge she had seen before still lingered, a faint smear against the oak, And this wax? Still a mystery. You're certain no candles are used here? None, he said firmly. The electric light's reliable, and I've no need for candles. Perhaps a customer dropped it. Some carry them for their homes, you know, with outages and all. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the brass hook behind the counter, where the key to the display case hung. Its ornate bow gleamed, untouched by dust, suggesting frequent handling. She stepped toward the back door, its bolt still smooth and well-oiled, and tested it, finding it slid easily. The dish on a nearby shelf held the door's key, its surface free of fingerprints, as if recently wiped. "This door," she said. "You're certain it was bolted last night?" "Absolutely," Hawthorne replied, his voice tinged with impatience. "I check it every evening, along with the front door and windows. No one could have come through without breaking something." Miss Marple's gaze followed the dust trail, which led toward the back door, then veered to the narrow staircase in the corner, ascending to the loft. "May I look upstairs again?" she asked. "Just to be thorough." Hawthorne hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, though there's nothing up there but old stock and papers." "Mind the steps. They're steep." She climbed carefully, her hand on the banister, and entered the loft, a cramped space filled with crates and a small desk piled with invoices. The dust here was thicker, coating the floor like a fine grey veil, but it was disturbed by a single set of footprints, large, masculine, with a worn heel that matched the scuff mark below. They led to the desk and back, as if someone had paced briefly. She examined the desk, finding a ledger open to a page of recent sales, the figures modest, and a crumpled receipt for a crate of books delivered last week. Nothing else seemed amiss, but the footprints intrigued her. They were fresh, the dust around them undisturbed, suggesting a recent visit. Descending, she paused at the back door, peering through its small window into the alley beyond. The cobbles were damp from morning dew, and a faint mark, perhaps a shoe print, caught her eye, leading towards the street. She made a mental note to inspect the alley later, when Hawthorne was less likely to hover. "You've been most patient, Mr. Hawthorne," she said, returning to the counter. "One last thing. Have you had any strangers in the shop recently, apart from your usual customers?" His face tightened, and he adjusted his pince-nez. "Strangers? Well, there was a man last week, asking about rare books. Rough sort, not a reader, I'd wager. Wanted to know about valuations, but he didn't stay long. I didn't like his manner. Pushy, you know." Miss Marple's needles, now in her hands, clicked rhythmically. "Pushy," she murmured. "Did he mention the codex?" "Not by name," Hawthorne said, "but he asked about my most valuable stock. I told him nothing specific and sent him on his way. Haven't seen him since she thanked him and stepped into the street, her mind alight with new details. The dust trail, the footprints, the alley mark. These were clues, small but sharp, like the pins in her bag. The stranger's visit, coupled with Hawthorne's debts, suggested an outside player, perhaps a buyer or an accomplice. Yet the footprints in the loft, matching the scuff mark, pointed to someone familiar with the shop. Someone who knew its corners and keys. Dr. Quill's alley sketches, Langston's safe, Wentworth's parcel, all swirled in her thoughts, each a piece of a pattern not yet clear. As she walked toward the village green, she recalled her friend Dolly Bantry's words. "The smallest things betray the biggest secrets." The codex was hidden, its thief relying on the villagers' quiet to shield their deed. But Miss Marple knew that quiet places held the loudest truths. She resolved to visit the alley behind the shop that afternoon, to see what else it might reveal. For now, she headed home, her needles clicking in her bag, her mind stitching together the clues with the patience of a woman who knew that even the tightest knots could be undone. Chapter 10. The Trap is Set. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber and shadow, as Miss Jane Marple sat in the vicarage parlour, sipping tea with Mrs. Clement. The room was a haven of chintz and cheer, with a crackling fire and a tray of scones fresh from the oven. But Miss Marple's mind was far from the cosy setting. The theft of the luminous codex had woven a complex web. Mr. Hawthorne's debts, Miss Wentworth's parcel doctor, Quill's sketches, Mr. Langston's safe, and the stranger's visit, each thread vibrant with possibility. The dust trail in the shop, the footprints in the loft, and the alley mark had sharpened her focus. But she needed more than clues to unmask the thief. She needed a spark to flush them out. And in a village where gossip spread like wildfire, she saw an opportunity to set a trap. Mrs. Clement, her eyes bright with curiosity, leaned forward, her teacup poised. "Jane, you've been so quiet about this book business. Surely you've some idea who took it. The village is all aflutter, people saying it's a London gang, or even poor Mr. Hawthorne himself." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her knitting a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. "People do talk, don't they?" she said, her tone mild. "But I've been thinking, Mrs. Clement, that a little rumour might stir things up. Suppose we let it slip that Mr. Hawthorne has found another rare book in his loft, a manuscript, say, as valuable as the codex. He plans to display it tomorrow, in the same case. Wouldn't that be interesting?" Mrs. Clement's mouth formed a perfect O of delight. "Oh, Jane, you're clever. You think the thief might try again? I can spread the word, discreetly, of course. The sewing circle meets this evening, and you know how tongues wag there." "Discreetly, yes," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "Just a hint, enough to reach the right ears. We wouldn't want to alarm anyone unduly." She sipped her tea, her mind already picturing the shop at midnight, its shadows hiding a figure drawn by greed or desperation. By evening, the rumour had taken root. Mrs. Clement, with the finesse of a seasoned gossip, dropped the tale at the sewing circle, where it spread to the butcher, the postman, and the tea shop in a matter of hours. By the next morning, St. Mary Mead was abuzz with talk of Mr. Hawthorne's new treasure, a manuscript found among forgotten crates, to be displayed under lock and key. Miss Marple, knitting by her parlour window, watched the village stir, knowing the bait was set. She had enlisted Constable Reed, a stolid but willing young man, to join her in the shop that night, hidden among the shelves, to watch for any who might bite. To test the suspect's reactions, she attended a village tea party at the church hall, a gathering of local worthies where scones and speculation flowed freely. The hall was festooned with bunting, its tables laden with cakes and teapots, and the air hummed with chatter. Miss Marple, in her best hat with its single feather, circulated quietly, her ears tuned to every nuance. She first approached Miss Wentworth, who stood near the refreshment table, her hands twisting a napkin as if it were her nerves. "Good afternoon, Miss Wentworth," Miss Marple said, offering a scone. "Have you heard about Mr. Hawthorne's find?" Another rare book, they say, to be shown tomorrow. Quite exciting for the village, isn't it?" Miss Wentworth's face paled, her napkin fraying in her grip. "Another book," she stammered. I hadn't heard. How wonderful for him." Her eyes darted to the door, and she excused herself hastily, claiming a headache. Miss Marple noted the tremor in her voice, the sudden flush on her cheeks. Next she found Dr. Quill by a window, his nose buried in a small notebook, his pencil scratching furiously. "Dr. Quill," she said, her tone warm, "you must be thrilled about Mr. Hawthorne's new manuscript. Another chance to study something rare, perhaps?" He looked up, his eyes sharp behind his spectacles. "A new manuscript?" he said, his voice tight with interest. "What kind?" "Alchemical, like the Codex. I must see it." He scribbled a note, his hand shaking slightly, and Miss Marple saw a flicker of hunger in his gaze, like a man glimpsing a long-sought prize. Finally, she approached Mr. Langston, who stood near the vicar, his gold watch chain glinting as he charmed a group of matrons. "Mr. Langston," she said, "you've heard about the new book at Parchment and Quill, I presume? A rare find, they say, to be displayed tomorrow. A collector like yourself must be intrigued." His smile tightened, though his voice remained smooth. "Indeed, Miss Marple. Hawthorne seems to have a knack for unearthing treasures. I'll have to pay a visit." His eyes held hers for a moment, assessing before he turned back to his audience, his laugh a touch too hearty. Miss Marple returned home, satisfied. Each suspect had reacted, Wentworth with fear, Quill with fervour, Langston with guarded interest, confirming her trap was well placed. That evening she met Constable Reed at the edge of the village, his lantern dimmed to avoid notice. He was a solid young man, more accustomed to stray sheep than thieves, but his earnestness reassured her. "Miss Marple," he whispered, "you're sure about this?" "If the thief comes, it could be dangerous nonsense, Constable," she said, her voice low but firm. "A thief bold enough to take the Codex won't expect us. We'll be quiet as mice, hidden in the shadows. Bring your notebook, we may need it." They slipped into Parchment and Quill through the back door, which Mr. Hawthorne had left unbolted at her request. The shop was dark, its shelves looming like silent sentinels, the display case a ghostly outline in the moonlight. A new book, a worthless volume dressed in aged leather, sat on the velvet cushion, a convincing decoy. Miss Marple chose a hiding spot behind a tall shelf, her shawl blending with the shadows, while Reed crouched near the counter, his truncheon at the ready. The clock tower chimed 11, then midnight, the silence between each note thick with anticipation. Miss Marple's eyes adjusted to the dark, her ears attuned to every creak. The dust trail, the footprints, the wax smudge, all danced in her mind, but she pushed them aside, focusing on the present. The thief, she knew, was driven by desire, and desire made people careless. As the minutes ticked by, she thought of her friend Sir Henry Clithering, who once said that traps worked best when the prey thought themselves the hunter. She waited, her needles still in her bag, her breath steady, her mind as sharp as the village's quiet. The trap was set, the stage dark and saint. Mary Mead held its breath. The Codex's thief, lured by the promise of another prize, would soon reveal themselves, or so Miss Marple hoped. In the stillness, she felt the familiar thrill of the chase, knowing that truth, like a moth, was drawn to the light of her patience. Chapter 11. The Thief Revealed. The darkness within parchment and quill was absolute, broken only by slivers of moonlight that slipped through the mullioned windows, casting faint shadows across the shop's ancient shelves. Miss Jane Marple crouched behind a towering bookcase, her shawl blending seamlessly with the gloom, her breath slow and silent. Beside her, Constable Reed shifted slightly, his bulk a reassuring presence in the cramped space, his truncheon gripped tightly. The trap had been set with care. A rumour of a new, valuable manuscript in the display case spread through the village's eager gossip, designed to lure the thief of the luminous codex back to the scene. The clock tower had chimed midnight minutes ago, and now the shop held its breath, waiting for the faintest sound to betray an intruder. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as the pins in her knitting bag, replayed the clues that had led to this moment. The unforced lock, the wax smudge on the counter, the scuff mark by the case, the dust trail toward the back door, the footprints in the loft. Miss Wentworth's nervous parcel doctor. Quill's meticulous sketches, Mr. Langston's new safe, and Mr. Hawthorne's mysterious stranger each pointed to a motive, but the truth lay in who would act tonight. Her trap relied on human nature, greed, obsession, or desperation, and she knew that in St. Mary Mead such impulses were as predictable as the church bells. A faint creak broke the silence, so soft it might have been the shop settling, but Miss Marple's ears, attuned to every nuance, caught it. It came from the back door, followed by the barest whisper of metal, a key turning in a well-oiled lock. She touched Constable Reed's arm, signalling silence, and peered through a gap in the shelves. A shadow moved, lit by the flicker of a candle held low, its flame shielded by a gloved hand. The figure was tall, clad in a dark coat, moving with the cautious grace of one accustomed to stealth. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene, as the figure approached the display case, the candle casting a trembling glow on the glass. The intruder paused, setting the candle on the counter. Its wax, she noted, was the same pale hue as the smudge she had found days before. A glint of metal appeared in their hand. A slender tool, not a key but a lockpick, its tip probing the brass lock with practiced skill. The case clicked open, the sound sharp in the stillness, and the figure reached for the decoy manuscript, lifting it with a reverence that spoke of obsession. Constable Reed tensed, ready to spring, but Miss Marple's hand stayed him. She wanted the thief to commit, to reveal their intent beyond doubt. The figure turned, the candlelight catching their face, and Miss Marple's suspicions were confirmed. It was Mr. Victor Langston, his polished features taut with focus, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of acquisition. He slipped the decoy into a leather satchel, his movements swift, and turned toward the back door. "Now, Constable," Miss Marple whispered, and Reed lunged forward, his lantern flaring to life, bathing the shop in harsh light. "Mr. Langston!" he barked. "Step away from the case!" Langston froze, the satchel clutched to his chest, his face a mask of shock that swiftly hardened into defiance. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth despite the circumstance, "and Constable Reed." "Quite the ambush. May I ask what this is about?" Miss Marple stepped forward, her shawl slipping slightly, her eyes as piercing as her knitting needles. "I think you know Mr. Langston. That book in your satchel is a decoy, but your presence here confirms what I suspected. You took the luminous codex, didn't you? For your private library, where no one else could claim it. Langston's smile was thin, his eyes calculating. "A bold accusation, Miss Marple." "I was merely inspecting this new manuscript I'd heard about. No harm in that, surely." "No harm," she said, her tone gentle but unyielding. "Except that you picked the lock, just as you did before. The codex is in your manor, isn't it? Hidden in that new safe, perhaps, or a drawer, with a false bottom, the wax smudge on the counter, the scuff mark from your shoe, size 10 with a worn heel, and your inquiries about locksmiths all point to you." Langston's composure faltered, his hand tightening on the satchel. "You've no proof," he said, but his voice wavered, and Miss Marple saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. Constable Reed stepped closer, his truncheon raised. "We'll see about that, sir. You'll come with me, and we'll search your manor. If the codex is there, you'll have some explaining to do." Langston's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. "Very well," he said, his voice low. "It's in my library, in a drawer with a concealed panel." I couldn't resist it. The codex, its beauty, its rarity, it was meant for my collection, not Hawthorne's dusty shop. He spoke with the fervour of a man confessing a passion, not a crime, and Miss Marple felt a pang of pity, though her resolve remained firm. As Reed bound Langston's hands, Miss Marple examined the candle on the counter, its wax a perfect match for the smudge. "You used a candle to avoid the electric light," she said, "knowing it might draw attention, and your skill with locks, learned, I presume, from your youth. A collector's ambition can be a dangerous thing, Mr. Langston." He offered no reply. His head bowed as Reed led him out the back door. Miss Marple followed, her steps measured, her mind already piecing together the final threads. Langston's confession confirmed her deductions. The scuff mark matched his shoes, the wax came from his antique candlestick, and his locksmith inquiries betrayed a skill honed long before his wealth. The codex had been taken not for profit, but for pride, a trophy for a man who saw ownership as a mark of supremacy. As they emerged into the alley, the night air cool against her cheeks, Miss Marple glanced at the cobblestones, where a faint shoe print, Langston's no doubt, marked his earlier passage. The village slept, unaware of the drama unfolding in its quiet heart, but Miss Marple knew that by morning the news would spread like wildfire. She thought of her friend Dolly Bantry, who once said that greed was a mirror, reflecting a man's truest self. Langston's reflection, polished though it was, had cracked under the weight of his desire. "Constable," she said as they walked toward the manor, "you'll find the codex in that drawer he mentioned. And perhaps a lockpick or two, hidden in his study. Be thorough, but gentle. The book is delicate." Reed nodded, his respect for her evident. "You're a wonder, Miss Marple." "How do you know it was him?" She smiled, adjusting her shawl. "People, Constable, are not so different from books. They have their pages, their secrets, and their flaws. You only need to read them carefully, with that." She turned toward home, leaving the constable to his task, her mind already settling, the mystery's knot, untangled at last. Chapter 12. The Village Restored. The first light of dawn touched the rooftops of St. Mary Mead, gilding the village in a soft, forgiving glow, as Constable Reed escorted Mr. Victor Langston to the police station. Miss Jane Marple walked homeward along the quiet lanes, her shawl draped against the morning chill, her steps measured and thoughtful. The night's revelations, the thief unmasked, the luminous codex soon to be recovered, had brought a satisfying close to the puzzle, but Miss Marple knew that mysteries, like life, left ripples in their wake. The codex would return to parchment and quill, but the human hearts entangled in the affair would need time to mend. By mid-morning, the village was alive with the news, spread through the post office and tea shop like ink on blotting paper. Mr. Langston, the polished collector, caught in the act, attempting to steal a decoy manuscript, his confession spilling forth like an overturned inkwell. The constable, with a warrant in hand, had searched Langston Manor, finding the codex concealed in a library drawer with a cunning false bottom, its illuminated pages unharmed. The book was returned to Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, who stood in his shop cradling it as one might a lost child, his pince-nez fogged with emotion. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice thick, "I can't thank you enough." "Without you it might have been lost forever," Miss Marple waved a hand, her expression serene. "Nonsense, Mr. Hawthorne. It was human nature that revealed the truth, not I. Mr. Langston's ambition blinded him. He saw the codex as a prize, not a piece of history. But now it's back where it belongs. The shop, once shadowed by loss, regained its quiet dignity. Customers trickled in, drawn by curiosity, and Hawthorne's sales ledger showed a modest uptick, his debts easing with the book's return. The wax smudge, the scuff mark, the dust trail, all faded into memory, relics of a solved enigma. In the days that followed, loose ends unravelled with surprising ease. Miss Clara Wentworth, her nerves frayed by gossip, confessed to Miss Marple over a cup of weak tea in her cat-cluttered cottage. "I was snooping," she admitted, her hands fluttering. "I hoped to learn about the shop's valuables, to sell tips to a dealer in Much Benham. But I never stole anything, I swear it. That parcel was just old newspapers, for my cat's litter." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking, and suggested a quieter hobby, perhaps gardening, to soothe Miss Wentworth's restless spirit. Dr. Ernest Quill, chastened by the affair, visited Parchment and Quill with a sheaf of notes in hand. "I let my obsession get the better of me," he told Hawthorne, his voice earnest. "But I'd like to make amends. Let me catalogue your collection free of charge. It'll keep me from sketching locks and alleys." Hawthorne, ever the gentleman, accepted, and the two men bent over the shelves, their shared love of books bridging the gap of suspicion. Even the mysterious stranger who had argued with Hawthorne proved innocuous. A debt collector from a London firm, pressing for payments on the shop's loans. With the codex restored and business improving, Hawthorne settled his accounts, the shadow of financial ruin lifting like morning mist. Miss Marple, back in her rose-draped cottage, resumed her knitting by the parlour window, the fire crackling cheerfully in the grate. Her notebook lay closed on the table, its pages filled with observations that had cracked the case. She sipped Earl Grey, watching the village stir outside, children playing on the green, the postman making his rounds, the vicar's wife bustling with baskets. St. Mary Mead seemed unchanged, its surface as tranquil as a mill-pond, but Miss Marple knew better. Beneath the polite nods and drawn curtains lay the complexities of human nature, greed, fear, passion, ever ready to weave the next intrigue. As the afternoon waned, she set aside her needles and gazed at the dahlias nodding in her garden. Another mystery solved, another thread tied off, but her mind, restless as a bird, already fluttered toward what might come next. In St. Mary Mead, after all, The quietest places held the most secrets. And Miss Jane Marple was always ready to listen.